Chapter 12 of the Last Journals of David Livingstone in Central Africa, from 1865 to his death. Volume 1 of 2, 1866 through 1868, by David Livingstone and Horace Waller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 12 prepares to examine Lake Bemba. Starts from Kasembe's 11th June 1868. Dead leopard. Moenpanda's reception. The river Luongo. Weird death song of slaves. The forest grave. Lake Bembo changed to Lake Bangweolo. Chikumbis. The Imbazwa people. Kombo stockade. Mazitu difficulties. Discovers Lake Bangweolo on 18th July 1868. The lake chief Mapuni. Description of the lake. Prepares to navigate it. Embarks for Lafunge Island. Immense size of lake. Reaches Mpabala Island. Strange dream. Fears of canoemen. Return to shore. March back. Sends letters. Meets Bayamwezi. Reviews recent explorations at length. Disturbed state of country. 1st June 1868. Muhammad proposes to go to Katanga to buy copper and invites me to go too. I wish to see the Lufra River, but I must see Bemba or Bangweolo. Grant guidance from above. 2nd June 1868. In passing a field of cassava, I picked the pods of a plant called malumbi, which climbs up the cassava bushes. At the root it has a number of tubers with eyes exactly like the potato. One plant had 16 of these tubers, each about 2 inches long and 1 1/2 inch in diameter. Another tuber was 5 inches long and 2 in diameter. It would be difficult for anyone to distinguish them from English potatoes. When boiled, they are a little waxy, and compared with our potato, hard. There are colors inside, the outer part reddish, the inner whiter. At first, none of the party knew them, but afterwards they were recognized as cultivated at Zanzibar by the name men, and very good when mashed with fish. If in Zanzibar, they are probably known in other tropical islands. 4th June, 1868. From what I see of slaving, even in its best phases, I would not be a slave dealer for the world. 5th June, 1868. The Queen Maori passed us this morning, going to build a hut at her plantation. She has a pleasant European countenance, clean light brown skin, and a merry laugh, and would be admired anywhere. I stood among the cassava to see her pass. She twirled her umbrella as she came near, borne by 12 men, and seemed to take up the laugh which made her and her maids bolt at my reception. Showing that she laughs not with her mouth only, but with her eyes and cheeks, she said, "Yambo, how are you?" To which I replied, "Tambo sana," very well. One of her attendants said, "Give her something of what you have at hand or in the pockets." I said, "I have nothing here," and asked her if she would come back near my hut. She replied that she would, and I duly sent for 2 strings of red beads, which I presented. Being lower than she, I could see that she had a hole through the cartilage near the point of her slightly aquiline nose, and a space was filed between the 2 front teeth so as to leave a triangular hole. After delay had grown vexatious, we marched 3 hours on the 9th, and reached the Katofia River, covered with aquatic trees and running into the Membreze, 5 yards wide and knee deep. 10th June, 1868. Detained again, for business is not finished with the people of Kasembe. The people cannot esteem the slave trader, who is used as a means of punishing those who have family differences, as those of a wife with her husband or a servant with his master. The slaves are said to be generally criminals, and are sold in revenge or as punishment. Kapika's wife had an ornament of the end of a shell called the cone. It was borrowed, and she came away with it in her hair. The owner, without making any effort to recover it, seized one of Kapika's daughters as a pledge that Kapika would exert himself to get it back. At last the tedious delay came to an end, and we must now follow the doctor on his way south to discover Lake Bemba. 11th June, 1868. Cross the Membreze, 10 yards broad and thigh deep, ascending a range of low hills of hardened sandstone, covered, as the country generally is, with forest. Our course southeast and south-southeast. Then descended into a densely wooded valley having a rivulet 4 yards wide and knee deep. Buffaloes and elephants very numerous. 12th June, 1868. We crossed the Membreze again twice, then a very deep, narrow rivulet, and stopped at another in a mass of trees where we spend the night, and killing an ox, remained next day to eat it. When at Kangwenga, a small party of men came past, shouting as if they had done something of importance. On going to them, I found that 2 of them carried a lion slung to a pole. It was a small, maneless variety, called the lion of Nyasi, or long grass. It had killed a man, and they killed it. They had its mouth carefully strapped and the paws tied across its chest, and were taking it to Kasembe. Nyasi means long grass, such as towers overhead, and is as thick in the stalk as a goose quill, and is erroneously applied to Nyassa. Other lions, Thambwe, Karamo, Simba, are said to stand 5 feet high and some higher. This seemed about 3 feet high, but it was too dark to measure it. 13th June, 1868. The Arabs distinguish the Swahili, or Arabs of mixed African blood, by the absence of beard and whiskers. These are usually small and stunted in the Swahili. Birds as the drongo shrike, and a bird very like the gray linnet, with a thick reddish bill, assemble in very large flocks now that it is winter, and continue thus till November, or period of the rains. A very minute bee goes into the common small holes in worm-eaten wood to make a comb and lay its eggs, with a supply of honey. There are 7 or 8 honeybees of small size in this country. A sphex may be seen to make holes in the ground, placing stupefied insects in them with her eggs. Another species watches when she goes off to get more insects, and every now and then goes in too to lay her eggs. I suppose without any labor. There does not appear to be any enmity between them. We remained a day to buy food for the party and eat our ox. 14th June, 1868. March over well-wooded highlands with dolomite rocks cropping out and trees all covered with lichens. The watershed then changed to the south. 15th June, 1868. Very cold in mornings now, 43 degrees. Found Monempanda, Kasembe's brother, on the Lulupauta, a stream 20 yards wide and flowing west. The Monempanda, visited by the Portuguese, was grandfather to this one, and not at the same spot. It is useless to put down the names of chiefs as indicating geographical positions, for the name is often continued, but at a spot far distant from the dwelling of the original possessor. A slave tried to break out of his slave stick, and actually broke half an inch of tough iron with his fingers. The end stuck in the wood, or he would have freed himself. The chief gave me a public reception, which was like that of Kasembe, but better managed. He is young and very handsome, but for a defect in his eyes, which makes him keep them half shut or squinting. He walked off in the jaunty way all chiefs do in this country, to show the weight of rings and beads on the legs, and many imitate this walk who have none, exactly as our fathers imitated the big cravat of George IV, who thereby hid defects in his neck. Thousands carried their cravats over the chin who had no defects to hide. Monempanda carried his back stiffly, and no wonder. He had about 10 yards of a train carried behind it. About 600 people were present. They kept rank, but not step, were well armed. Marimbas and square drums formed the bands, and one musician added his voice. I have been to Saide, the Sultan. I have been to Maraput, King of Portugal. I have been to the sea. At a private reception where he was divested of his train and had only 1 umbrella instead of 3, I gave him a cloth. The Arabs thought highly of him, but his graciousness had been expended on them in getting into debt. He now showed no inclination to get out of it, but offered about a 20th part of the value of the goods in liquidation. He sent me 2 pots of beer, which I care not to drink except when very thirsty on a march, and promised a man to guide me to Chikumbi, and then refused. Kasembe rose in the esteem of all as Monempanda sank, and his people were made to understand how shabbily he had behaved. The Lula Puta is said to flow into the Luena, and that into the Luongo. There must be 2 Luenas. 2nd June, 1868. March across a grassy plain southerly to the Luongo, a deep river embowered in a dense forest of trees, all covered with lichens, some flat, others long and thready, like old men's beards, and waving in the wind, just as they do on the mangrove swamp trees on the coast. The Luongo here is 50 yards broad and 3 fathoms deep. Near its junction with the Luapula, it is 100 yards. It rises here to 8 fathoms depth. A bridge of 40 yards led us over to an island, and a branch of the river was 10 yards beyond. The bridge had been broken, some thought on purpose, but it was soon mended with trees 18 to 20 yards long. We went a little way beyond, and then halted for a day at a rivulet flowing into the Luongo, 20 yards off. 23rd June, 1868. We waited for copper here, which was at first refused as payment of debt. I saw now that the Luongo had steep clay banks 15 feet down and many meadows, which must be swimming during the rains. The Luena is said to rise east of this. In a private letter, Livingstone shows that he had seldom been more affected by the sufferings of slaves than at this time, and it would perhaps be difficult to imagine any scene more calculated to excite misery and distress of mind. The following incident deals with the firm belief in a future state, which enters so largely into the minds of all Africans, and which for very lack of guidance assumes all the distorted growths of superstition. He must be of a thankless spirit who does not long to substitute the great vision of future peace afforded by Christianity, in lieu of the ghastly satisfaction which cheered these men, when he sees by the light of this story the capacity that exists for realizing a life beyond the grave. 24th June, 1868. 6 men-slaves were singing as if they did not feel the weight and degradation of the slave sticks. I asked the cause of their mirth, and was told that they rejoiced at the idea, quote, of coming back after death and haunting and killing those who had sold them, end quote. Some of the words I had to inquire about, for instance, the meaning of the words to haunt and kill by spirit power. Then it was, "Oh, you sent me off to Manga, seacoast, but the yoke is off when I die, and back I shall come to haunt and kill you." Then all joined in the chorus, which was the name of each vendor. It told not of fun, but of bitterness and tears of such as there were oppressed, and on the side of the oppressors there was a power. There be higher than they. Parembe was one of the culprits thus menaced. The slave owner asked Kapika's wife if she would return to kill Kapika. The others answered to the names of the different men with laughter. Her heart was evidently sore, for a lady to come so low down is to her grievous. She has lost her jaunty air, and is, with her head shaved, ugly, but she never forgets to address her captors with dignity, and they seem to fear her. 25th June, 1868. We went over flat forest with patches of brown hematite cropping out. This is the usual iron ore, but I saw in a village pieces of specular iron ore which had been brought for smelting. The Luongo flowed away somewhat to our right or west, and the villagers had selected their site where only well water could be found. We went 10 minutes toward the Luongo and got abundance. The gardens had high hedges round to keep off wild beasts. We came to a grave in the forest. It was a little rounded mound, as if the occupant sat in it in the usual native way. It was strewed over with flour, and a number of the large blue beads put on it. A little path showed that it had visitors. This is the sort of grave I should prefer, to lie in the still, still forest, and no hand ever disturb my bones. The graves at home always seem to me to be miserable, especially those in the cold, damp clay, and without elbow room. But I have nothing to do but wait till he who is over all decides where I have to lay me down and die. Poor Mary lies on Shupanga Brae, and beaks for net the sun. Came to the Chondo River, which is the boundary between Kasembe and Chikumbi, but Kasembe is over all. 27th June, 1868. We crossed a flooded marsh with water very cold, and then the Chondo itself 12 feet broad and knee-deep, and then on to another strong brook, Nsenga. After service, we went up hills to a stockade of Banyamwenzi on the Kalamina River, and here we built our sheds. The spot is called Kazinga, and is on the top of a sandstone range covered as usual with forest. The Banyamwezi beat off the Mazitu with their guns, while all the country people fled. The Banyamwezi are decidedly uglier than the Balanda and the Batawa. They eat no fish, though they come from the east side of Tanganyika, where fish are abundant and cheap. But though uglier, they have more of the sense of honor with traders than their aborigines. 29th June, 1868. Observed the smokes today, the first of the season. They obscured the whole country. 1st July, 1868. I went over to Chikumbi, the paramount chief of this district, and gave him a cloth, begging a man to guide me to Bangweolo. He said that I was welcome in his country. All were so. I had better wait 2 days till he had selected a good man as a guide, and he would send some food for me to eat on the journey. He would not say 10 days, but only 2, and his man would take me to the smaller part of the lake and leave others to forward me to the greater of Banguiola. The smaller part is named Bemba, but that name is confusing, because Bemba is the name of the country in which a portion of the lake lies. When asking for Lake Bemba, Kasongo's son told me, Bemba is not a lake, but a country. It is therefore better to use the name Banguiolo, which is applied to the great mass of the water, though I fear that our English folks will boggle at it, or call it Bungy Hollow. Some Arabs say Bambiolo as easier of pronunciation, but Banguiolo is the correct word. Chikumbe's stockade is 1.5 hours southeast of our camp at Kazinga. 2nd July 1868, writing to the consul at Zanzibar to send supplies of cloth to Ujiji. 100 pieces, 40 kaniki, 80 Maracano, 34 inches broad, or samsam, fine red beads, talaka, 12 frasilas. I ask for soap, coffee, sugar, candles, sardines, French preserved meats, a cheese in tin, nautical almanac for 1869 and 1870, shoes, 2 or 4 pairs, ruled paper, pencils, sealing wax, ink, powder, flannel serge, 12 frasila beads, 6 of talaka, added 3F pale red, 3W white. 3rd July, 1868. The summary of the sources which I have resolved to report as flowing into the central line of drainage formed by the Champese, Luapula, and Lualaba are 13 in all, and each is larger than the Isis at Oxford or Avon at Hamilton. 5 flow into the eastern line of drainage going through Tanganyika, and 5 more into the western line of drainage for Lufira, 23 or more in all. The Lualaba and the Lufira unite in the lake of the chief Kinkosana. 5th July 1868. I borrowed some paper from Mohammed Baghrib to write home by some Arabs going to the coast. I will announce my discovery to Lord Clarendon, but I reserve parts of the Lualaba and Tanganyika for future confirmation. I have no doubts on the subject, for I receive the reports of natives of intelligence at first hand, and they have no motive for deceiving me. The best maps are formed from the same sort of reports at third or fourth hand. Cold northeast winds prevail at present. 6th July 1868. Divided our salt, that each may buy provisions for himself. It is here of more value than beads. Chikumbi sent fine flour, a load for 2 stout men, carried in a large basket slung to a pole, and a fine fat sheep, carried too because it was too fat to walk the distance from his stockade. 7th, 8th, and 9th July 1868. After delaying several days to send our guide, Chikumbi said that he feared the country people would say that the Inglesa brought the Mazitu to them, and so blame will be given to him. I set this down as words of Pombey, beery babble, but after returning from Banguiolo, I saw that he must have been preparing to attack a stockade of Banyamwezi in our path, and had he given us a guide, that man would have been in danger in coming back. He therefore preferred the safety of his man to keeping his promise to me. I got a Banyamwezi guide and left on the 10th July 1868, going over gently rising sandstone hills covered with forest and seeing many deserted villages, the effects of the Mazitu foray. We also saw the Mazitu sleeping places and paths. They neglect the common paths of the country as going from one village to another, and take straight courses in the direction they wish to go, treading down the grass so as to make a well-marked route. The Banyamwezi expelled them, cutting off so many of them with their guns and arrows that the marauders retired. The effect of this success on the minds of the Imbashwa, or Imbazwas, as Chikumbi's people are called, was not gratitude, but envy at the new power sprung up among them of those who came originally as traders in copper. Kombo Kombo's stockade, the village to which we went this day, was the first object of assault, and when we returned he told us that Chikumbi had assaulted him on 3 sides but was repulsed. The Banyamwezi were, moreover, much too sharp as traders for the Imbashwa, cheating them unmercifully and lying like Greeks. Kombo Kombo's stockade was on the Chibarasi River, which flows briskly, 8 yards broad and deep, through a mile of sponge. We came in the midst of a general jollification, and were most bountifully supplied with pombe and food. The Banyamwezi acknowledge allegiance to the Sultan of Zanzibar, and all connected with him are respected. Combo Combo pressed food and drink on me, and when I told him that I had nothing to return for it, he said that he expected nothing. He was a child of the Sultan and ought to furnish all I needed. 11th July, 1868. On leaving the Chibarasi, we passed up over a long line of hills with many villages and gardens, but mostly deserted during the Mazitu raid. The people fled into the forests on the hills and were an easy prey to the marauders, who seemed to have been unmerciful. When we descended into the valley beyond, we came to a strong stockade, which had successfully resisted the onset of the Mazitu. We then entered on flat forest with here and there sponges containing plenty of water. Plains succeeded the hills and continued all the way to Bangweolo. We made a fence in the forest, and next day, 12th July, reached the Refuba, 50 yards broad and 4.5 feet deep, full of aquatic plants, and flowing southwest into the Luongo. It had about 1.5 miles of sponge on each side of it. We encamped a little south of the river. 13th July, 1868. On resting at a deserted spot, the men of a village in the vicinity came to us excited and apparently drunk, and began to work themselves up still more by running about, poising their spears at us, taking aim with their bows and arrows, and making as if about to strike with their axes. They thought that we were marauders, and some plants of ground nuts strewn about gave color to the idea. There is usually one good soul in such rabbles. In this case a man came to me, and addressing his fellows, said, "This is only your Pombe. White man, do not stand among them, but go away." And then he placed himself between me and a portion of the assailants, about 30 of whom were making their warlike antics. While walking quietly away with my good friends, they ran in front and behind bushes and trees, took aim with bow and arrow, but none shot. The younger man ran away with our 3 goats. When we had gone 1/4 mile, my friend told me to wait, and he would bring the goats, which he did. I could not feel the inebriates to be enemies, but in that state they are the worst one can encounter, for they have no fear as they have when sober. One snatched away a fowl from our guide. That too was restored by our friend. I did not load my gun, for any accidental discharge would have inflamed them to rashness. We got away without shedding blood, and were thankful. The Mazitu raid has produced lawlessness in the country. Everyone was taken as an enemy. 14th July, 1868. We remained a day at the stockade of Moigega. A Banyamweze or Garaganza man is settled here in Kabaya's district and on the strong rivulet called Mato. We felt secure only among the strangers, and they were friendly with us. 15th July, 1868. At the village on the south bank of the Mapanda, we were taken by the headman as Mazitu. He was evidently intoxicated and began to shut his gates with frantic gesticulations. I offered to go away, but others of his people, equally intoxicated, insisted on my remaining. I sat down a little, but seeing that the chief was still alarmed, I said to his people, "The chief objects, and I can't stay." They saw the reasonableness of this, but I could not get my cowardly attendants to come on, though one said to me, "Come, I shall show you the way. We must speak nice to them." This the wise boys think the perfection of virtue. Speaking nice means adopting a childish treble tone of voice, and words exactly similar to those of the little Scotch girl who, passing through a meadow, was approached by a cow, probably from curiosity. To appease this enemy, she said, "Oh, cuckoo, if you no hurt me, I no hurt you." I told them to come on and leave them quietly, but they remained babbling with them. The guide said that there was no water in front. This I have been told too often ever to believe, so I went on through the forest, and in an hour and a half came to a sponge, where being joined by my attendants, we passed the night. 16th July, 1868. Crossing this sponge and passing through flat forest, we came to another named Meshwe. When there, as a contrast, the young men volunteered to carry me across, but I had got off my shoes and was in the water, and they came along with me, showing the shallower parts. We finished the day's march by crossing the Molongosi spongy ooze, with 150 paces of deep water flowing northeast. The water in these oozes or sponges felt very cold, though only 60 degrees in the morning and 65 degrees at midday. The Molongosi people invited us into the village, but the forest, unless when infested with leopards and lions, is always preferable, for one is free from vermin and free from curiosity gazers, who in the village think they have a right to stare, but in the forest feel that they are not on an equality with strangers. It was on the 18th of July, 1868, we see that Dr. Livingstone discovered one of the largest of the Central African lakes. It is extraordinary to notice the total absence of all pride and enthusiasm, as almost parenthetically he records the fact. 17th and 18th July, 1868. Reached the chief village of Mapuni, near the north bank of Bangweolo. On the 18th I walked a little way out and saw the shores of the lake for the first time, thankful that I had come safely hither. I told the chief that my goods were all expended, and gave him a fathom of calico as all I could spare. I told him that as soon as I had seen and measured the lake, I would return north. He replied that seeing our goods were done, he could say nothing. He would give me guides, and what else he should do was known to himself. He gave a public reception at once. I asked if he had ever seen anyone like me, and he said never. A Babisa traveler asked me why I had come so far. I said I wished to make the country and people better known to the rest of the world, that we were all children of one Father, and I was anxious that we should know each other better, and that friendly visits should be made in safety. I told him what the Queen had done to encourage the growth of cotton on the Zambezi, and how we had been thwarted by slave traders and their abettors. They were pleased with this. When asked, I showed them my notebook, watch, compass, burning glass, and was loudly drummed home. I showed them the Bible, and told them a little of its contents. I shall require a few days more at Bangweolo than I at first intended. The moon being in its last stage of waning, I cannot observe till it is of some size. 19th July, 1868. Went down to Masantu's village, which is on the shore of the lake, and by a spring called Chipoka, which comes out of a mass of disintegrated granite. It is seldom that we see a spring welling out beneath a rock. They are covered by oozing sponges, if indeed they exist. Here we had as a spectator a man walking on stilts tied to his ankles and knees. There are a great many Babisa among the people. The women have their hair ornamented with strings of cowries, and well oiled with the oil and fat from the seeds of the mosiki trees. I sent the chief a fathom of calico, and got an audience at once. Masantu was an oldish man, had never prayed to the great Father of all, though he said the footsteps of Mungu, or Malungu, could be seen on a part of Lafunge Island. A large footstep may also be seen on the rock at the Chambezi, about 15 inches long. He informed us that the lake is much the largest at the part called Bangweolo. The country around the lake is all flat and very much denuded of trees, except the matsikri or mosiki, which has fine dark dense foliage, and is spared for its shade and all the fatty oil yielded by its seeds. We saw the people boiling large pots full of the dark brown fat, which they use to lubricate their hair. The islands, 4 in number, are all flat but well peopled. The men have many canoes, and all are expert fishermen. They are called Mbangwa, but are marked on the forehead and chin as Babisa, and file the teeth to points. They have many children, as fishermen usually have. 21st July, 1868. Canoe men are usually extortionate, because one cannot do without them. Mapuni claims authority over them, and sent to demand another fathom that he may give orders to them to go with us. I gave a hoe and a string of beads instead, but he insisted on the cloth, and kept the hoe too, as I could not afford the time to haggle. Chipoka spring water at 9 a.m., 75 degrees. Lake water at same time, 71 degrees. Air, 72 degrees. Chipoka spring at 4 p.m., 74 degrees, 5 minutes. Lake water at same time, 75 degrees. Air, 71 degrees 5 minutes. Wet bulb, 70 degrees. No hot fountains or earthquakes are known in this region. The bottom of the lake consists of fine white sand, and a broad belt of strong rushes, say 100 yards wide, shows shallow water. In the afternoons, quite a crowd of canoes anchor at its outer edge to angle. The hooks are like ours, but without barbs. The fish are perch chiefly, but others similar to those that appear in the other lakes are found, and two which attain the large size of 4 feet by 1.5 inches thickness. One is called Sampa. 22nd July, 1868. A very high wind came with the new moon and prevented our going, and also the fishermen from following their calling. Mapuni thought that we meant to make an escape from him to the Babisa on the south, because we were taking our goats. I therefore left them and 2 attendants at Masantu's village to assure him. 23rd July, 1868. Wind still too strong to go. Took lunars. 24th July, 1868, wind still strong. 25th July, 1868. Strong southeast wind still blowing, but having paid the canoemen amply for 4 days with beads, and given Masantu a hoe and beads too, we embarked at 11:40 a.m. in a fine canoe, 45 feet long, 4 feet deep, and 4 feet broad. The waves were high, but the canoe was very dry, and 5 stout men propelled her quickly toward an opening in Lifunge Island, on our southeast. Here we stopped to wood, and I went away to look at the island, which had the marks of hippopotami and a species of jackal on it. It had hard, wiry grass, some flowers, and a species of gapparidicious tree. The trees showed well the direction of the prevailing wind to be southeast, for the branches on that side were stunted or killed, while those on the northwest ran out straight, and made the trees appear, as sailors say, lopsided. The trunks, too, were bent that way. The canoemen now said that they would start, then that they would sleep here, because we could not reach the island Mapabala before dark, and would not get a hut. I said that it would be sleeping out of doors only in either case, so they went. We could see the island called Kisi on our east, apparently a double island about 15 miles off, and the tops of the trees barely visible on Mapabala on our southeast. It was all sea horizon on our south and north, between Lifunge and Mapabala, and between Lifunge and Kisi. We could not go to Kisi, because as the canoemen told us, they had stolen their canoe thence. Though we decided to go, we remained a while to let the sea go down. A hammerhead's nest on one of the trees was fully 4 feet high. Coarse rushes show the shoals near the islands. Only one shell was seen on the shores. The canoe ships much less water in this surf than our boat did in that of Nyassa. The water is of a deep sea-green color, probably from the reflection of the fine white sand of the bottom. We saw no part having the deep dark blue of Nyassa, and conjecture that the depth is not great. But I had to leave our line when Amoda absconded. On Kisi we observed a dark square mass, which at first I took to be a low hill. It turned out to be a mass of trees, probably the place of sepulture, for the graveyards are always untouched, and shows what a dense forest this land would become were it not for the influence of men. We reached Mpabala after dark. It was bitterly cold from the amount of moisture in the air. I asked a man who came to see what the arrival was for a hut. He said, "Do strangers require huts, or ask for them at night?" He then led us to the public place of meeting called Nsaka, which is a large shed with planks around and open spaces between instead of walls. Here we cooked a little porridge and ate it. Then I lay down on one side with the canoemen and my attendants at the fire in the middle, and was soon asleep, and dreamed that I had apartments in Minvar's hotel. This made me feel much amused next day, for I never dream unless I am ill, or going to be ill, and of all places in the world I never thought of Minvar's hotel in my waking moments. A freak of the fancy, surely, for I was not at all discontented with my fare or apartment. I was only afraid of giving a stock of vermin for my associates. 26th July, 1868. I have to stand the stare of a crowd of people at every new place for hours. All usually talk as quickly as their glib tongues can. These certainly do not belong to the tribes who are supposed to eke out their language by signs. A few indulge their curiosity in sightseeing, but go on steadily weaving nets, or by beating bark cloth, or in spinning cotton. Others smoke their big tobacco pipes, or nurse a baby, or enjoy the heat of the bright morning sun. I walked across the north end of the island and found it to be about 1 mile broad. I also took bearings of Cherubi Island from the eastern point of Mpabala, and found from the southeast point of Cherubi that there are 183 degrees of sea horizon from it to the point of departure of the Luapula. Cherubi is the largest of the islands and contains a large population, possessing many sheep and goats. At the highest part of Mpabala we could see the tops of the trees on Kasango, a small uninhabited islet, about 30 miles distant. The tops of the trees were evidently lifted up by the mirage, for near the shore and at other parts they were invisible, even with a good glass. This uninhabited islet would have been our second stage had we been allowed to cross the lake. As it is of the people themselves, it is as far beyond it to the mainland, called Manda, as from Masantus to Mpabala. 27th July, 1868. Took lunars and stars for latitude. The canoemen now got into a flurry because they were told here that the Kisi men had got an inkling that their canoe was here, and were coming to take it. They said to me that they would come back for me, but I could not trust thieves to be so honest. I thought of seizing their paddles and appealing to the headmen of the island, but aware from past experience how easy it is for acknowledged thieves like them to get up a tale to secure the cheap sympathy of the soft-headed or tender-hearted, I resolved to bear with meekness, though groaning inwardly, the loss of 2 of the 4 days for which I had paid them. I had only my coverlet to hire another canoe, and it was now very cold. The few beads left would all be required to buy food in the way back. I might have got food by shooting buffaloes, but that on foot and through grass with stalks as thick as a goose quill is dreadfully hard work. I had thus to return to Matsantus and trust to the distances as deduced from the time taken by the natives in their canoes for the size of the lake. We had come to Mapawala at the rate of 6 knots an hour and returned in the same with 6 stout paddlers. The latitude was 12 minutes in a southeast course, which may give 24 minutes as the actual distance. To the sleeping place, the islet Kasango, there was at least 28 minutes more, and from thence to the mainland, Manda, other 28 minutes. This 24 plus 28 plus 28 equals 80 minutes as the breadth from Masantu village, looking southeast. It lies in 11 degrees 0 minutes south. If we add on the half distance to this, we have 11 degrees 40 minutes as the latitude of Manda. The mainland to the south of Mapawala is called Kabende. The land's end running south of Masantu's village is the entrance to the Luapala. The clearest eye cannot see across it there. I saw clouds as if of grass burning, but they were probably kungu, an edible insect, whose masses have exactly the same appearance as they float above and on the water. From the time the canoes would take to go to Kabende, I believe the southern shore to be a little into 12 degrees of south latitude. The length, as inferred from canoes taking 10 days to go from Mapawala to the Chambeze, I take to be 150 miles, probably more. No one gave a shorter time than that. The Luapula is an arm of the lake for some 20 miles, and beyond that is never narrower than from 180 to 200 yards, generally much broader, and may be compared with the Thames at London Bridge. I think that I am considerably within the mark in setting down Bangweolo as 150 miles long by 80 broad. When told that it contained 4 large islands, I imagined that these would considerably diminish the watery acreage of the whole, as is said to be the case with 5 islands in Ukerewe. But even the largest island, Cherubi, does not in the least dwarf the enormous mass of the water of Bangweolo. A range of mountains named Lokinga extends from the southeast to the southwest. Some small burns come down from them, but no river. This range joins the Kone or Makone range, west of Katanga, from which on one side rises the Lufira and on the other the Liambe or Zambezi. The river of Manda, called Matanga, is only a departing and re-entering branch of the lake. Also the Luma and Loela rivers, some 30 yards broad, have each to be examined as springs on the south of the lake. July 29th, 1868. Not a single case of Derbyshire neck or of elephantiasis was observed anywhere near the lake. Consequently, the report we had of its extreme unhealthiness was erroneous. No muddy banks did we see, but in the way to it we had to cross so many sponges or oozes that the word matope, mud, was quite applicable, and I suspect if we had come earlier that we should have experienced great difficulty in getting to the lake at all. 30th July, 1868. We commenced our march back, being eager to get to Chukumbis in case Mohammed should go thence to Katanga. We touched at Mapuni's and then went on to the Molangosi. Clouds now began to cover the sky to the Mapanda, which has 15 yards of flood, though the stream itself is only 5 yards wide, and then to the Monto and Moeji's stockade, where we heard of Chukumbi's attack on Kombo-Kombos. Moeji had taken the hint and was finishing a second line of defense around his village. We reached him on the 1st August, 1868, and stopped for Sunday the 2nd. On the 3rd, back to the Rafubu, where I was fortunate enough to hire a canoe to take me over. In examining a tsetse fly very carefully, I see that it has a receptacle at the root of the piercer, which is of a black or dark red color, and when it is squeezed, a clear fluid is pressed out at its point. The other 2 parts of the proboscis are its shield, and have no bulb at the base. The bulb was pronounced at the Royal Society to be only muscle, but it is curious that muscle should be furnished where none is needed, and withheld in the movable parts of the shield where it is decidedly needed. 5th August, 1868. Reached Combo Combo, who is very liberal, and pressed us to stay a day with him as well as with others. We complied and found that Muhammad had gone nowhere. 7th August, 1868. We found a party starting from Kazinga for the coast, having our letters with them. It will take 5 months to reach the sea. The disturbed state of the country prevented parties of traders proceeding in various directions, and one that set off on the same day as us was obliged to return. Muhammad has resolved to go to Mayunwema as soon as parties of his men now out return. This is all in my favor. It is in the way I want to go to see Lulaba and Lufira to Chawambe. The way seems opening out before me, and I am thankful. I resolved to go north by way of Kasembe, and guides were ready to start, so was I. But rumors of war where we were going induced me to halt to find out the truth. The guides, by Mweze, were going to divine by means of a cock to see if it would be lucky to go with me at present. The rumors of danger became so circumstantial that our fence was needed. A well was dug inside, and the Bayanwemse were employed to smelt copper as for the market of Manyuema, and balls for war. Saide bin Omar soon came over the Luapula from Iramba, and the state of confusion induced the traders to agree to unite their forces and make a safe retreat out of the country. They objected very strongly to my going away down the right bank of the Luapula with my small party, though it was in sight, so I resolved to remain till all went. 13th August, 1868. The Bayanweze use a hammer shaped like a cone without a handle. They have both kinds of bellows, one of goatskin, the other of wood, with a skin over the mouth of a drum, and a handle tied to the middle of it. With these they smelt pieces of the large bars of copper into a pot, filled nearly full of wood ashes. The fire is surrounded by masses of ant hills, and in these are hollows made to receive the melted metal. The metal is poured while the pot is held with the hands, protected by wet rags. 15th August, 1868. Bin Omar, a Swahili, came from Mwaboso on Chambeze in 6 days, crossing in that space 22 burns or oozes from knee to waist deep. Very high and cold winds prevail at the present. It was proposed to punish Jakumbi when Said bin Omar came, as he is in debt and refuses payment, but I go off to Kasembe. I learn that there is another hot fountain in the Baloba country called Fungwe. This, with Kapira and Vana, makes 3 hot fountains in this region. Some people were killed in my path to Kasembe, so this was an additional argument against my going that way. Some Bayamwenzi report a tribe, the Bonyolo, that extract the upper front teeth like Batoka. They are near Luanda, and Lake Chipakola is there, probably the same as Kinkoza. Feeling my way, all the trees are now pushing out fresh young leaves of different colors. Winds southeast, clouds of upper stratum northwest. 29th August, 1868. Kaskas began today hot and sultry. This will continue till rains fall. Rumors of war, perpetual and near, and one circumstantial account of an attack made by the Bosse. That, again, contradicted. 31st August, 1868. Rain began here this evening, quite remarkable and exceptional, as it precedes the rains generally off the watershed by 2 months at least. It was a thunder shower, and it and another on the evening of the 2nd were quite partial. As we shall see, he takes advantage of this late experience to work out an elaborate treatise on the climate of this region, which is exceedingly important, bearing as it does upon the question of the periodical floods on the rivers which drain the enormous cistern lakes of Central Africa. The notion of a rainy zone, in which the clouds deposit their treasures in perpetual showers, has received no confirmation from my observations. In 1866-7, the rainfall was 42 inches. In 1867-8, it amounted to 53 inches. This is nearly the same as falls in the same latitudes on the west coast. In both years, the rains ceased entirely in May, and with the exception of 2 partial thunder showers on the middle of the watershed, no rain fell till the middle and end of October, and then, even in November, it was partial, and limited to small patches of country. But scarcely a day passed between October and May without a good deal of thunder. When the thunder began to roll or rumble, it was taken by the natives as an indication of the near cessation of the rains. The middle of the watershed is the most humid part. One sees the great humidity of its climate at once in the trees, old and young, being thickly covered with lichens, some flat on the trunks and branches, others long and thready, like the beards of old men waving in the wind. Large orchids on the trees, in company with the profusion of lichens, are seen nowhere else except in the mangrove swamps of the seacoast. I cannot account for the great humidity of the watershed as compared with the rest of the country, but by the prevailing winds and the rains being from the southeast, and thus from the Indian Ocean, with this wind generally on the surface, one can observe an upper strong wind from the northwest, that is, from the low humid west coast and Atlantic Ocean. The double strata of winds can easily be observed when there are two sheets of clouds, or when burning grass over scores of square miles sends up smoke sufficiently high to be caught by the upper or northwest wind. These winds probably meet during the heavy rains. Now in August they overlap each other. The probability arises from all continued rains within the tropics coming in the opposite direction from the prevailing wind of the year. Partial rains are usually from the southeast. The direction of the prevailing wind of this region is well marked on the islands in Lake Bangweolo. The trunks are bent away from the southeast, and the branches on that side are stunted or killed, while those on the northwest run straight and make the trees appear lopsided. The same bend away from the southeast is seen on all exposed situations, as in the trees covering the brow of a hill. At Kazinga, which is higher than the lake, the trees are covered with lichens, chiefly on the southeast sides and on the upper surfaces of branches running away horizontally to or from the northwest. Plants and trees, which elsewhere in Africa grow only on the banks of streams and other damp localities, are seen flourishing all over the country. The very rocks are covered with lichens and their crevices with ferns. But that which demonstrates the humidity of the climate most strikingly is the number of earthen sponges or oozes met with. In going to Bangweolo from Kazinga, I crossed 29 of these reservoirs in 30 miles of latitude, on a southeast course. This may give about one sponge for every 2 miles. The word bog conveys much of the idea of these earthen sponges, but it is inseparably connected in our minds with peat, and these contain not a particle of peat. They consist of black, porous earth, covered with a hard, wiry grass, and a few other damp-loving plants. In many places, the sponges hold large quantities of the oxide of iron from the big patches of brown hematite that crop out everywhere, and streams of this oxide, as thick as treacle, are seen moving slowly along in the sponge-like small red glaciers. When one treads on the black earth of the sponge, though little or no water appears on the surface, it is frequently squirted up the limbs and gives the idea of a sponge. In the paths that cross them, the earth readily becomes soft mud, but sinks rapidly to the bottom again, as if of great specific gravity. The water in them is always circulating and oozing. The places where the sponges are met with are slightly depressed valleys without trees or bushes, in a forest country where the grass, being only a foot or 15 inches high and thickly planted, often looks like a beautiful glade in a gentleman's park in England. They are from 1/4 of a mile to a mile broad, and from 2 to 10 or more miles long. The water of the heavy rain soaks into the level forest lands. One never sees runnels leading it off, unless occasionally a footpath is turned to that use. The water, descending about 8 feet, comes to a stratum of yellow sand, beneath which there is another stratum of fine white sand, which at its bottom cakes, so as to hold the water from sinking further. It is exactly the same as we found in the Kalahari Desert, in digging sucking places for water for our oxen. The water, both here and there, is guided by the fine sand stratum into the nearest valley, and here it oozes forth on all sides through the thick mantle of black, porous earth which forms the sponge. There in the desert it appears to damp the surface sands in certain valleys, and the bushmen, by a peculiar process, suck out a supply. When we had dug down to the caked sand there years ago, the people begged us not to dig further, as the water would all run away, and we desisted because we saw that the fluid poured in from the fine sand all round the well, but none came from the bottom or cake. 2 stupid Englishmen afterwards broke through the cake in spite of the entreaties of the natives, and the well and the whole valley dried up hopelessly. Here the water, oozing forth from the surface of the sponge mantle, collects in the center of the slightly depressed valley which it occupies, and near the head of the depression forms a sluggish stream. But further down, as it meets with more slope, it works out for itself a deeper channel, with perpendicular banks, with, say, 100 or more yards of sponge on each side, constantly oozing forth fresh supplies to augment its size. When it reaches rocky ground, it is a perennial burn, with many aquatic plants growing in its bottom. One peculiarity would strike anyone. The water never becomes discolored or muddy. I have seen only one stream muddied in the flood, the Coma, flowing through an alluvial plain in Low Perret. Another peculiarity is very remarkable. It is that after the rains have entirely ceased, these burns have their largest flow and cause inundations. It looks as if towards the end of the rainy season the sponges were lifted up by the water off their beds, and the pores and holes, being enlarged, are all employed to give off fluid. The water of the inundation run away. When the sponges are lifted up by superabundance of water, all the pores therein are opened. As the earthen mantle subsides again, the pores act like natural valves and are partially closed, and by the weight of the earth above them, the water is thus prevented from running away altogether, time also being required to wet all the sand through which the rains soak. The great supply may only find its way to the sponge a month or so after the great rains have fallen. I travelled in Lunda when the sponges were all supersaturated. The grassy sward was so lifted up that it was separated into patches or tufts, and if the foot missed the row of tufts of this wiry grass which formed the native path, down one plumped up to the thigh in slush. At that time we could cross the sponge only by the native paths, and the central burn only where they had placed bridges. Elsewhere they were impassable, as they poured off the waters of inundation. Our oxen were generally bogged. All 4 legs went down up to the body at once. When they saw the clear sandy bottom of the central burn, they readily went in, but usually plunged right overhead, leaving their tail up in the air to show the nervous shock they had sustained. These sponges are a serious matter in traveling. I crossed the 29 already mentioned at the end of the 4th month of the dry season, and the central burns seemed then to have suffered no diminution. They were then from calf to waist deep, and required from 15 to 40 minutes in crossing. They had many deep holes in the paths, and when one plumps therein, every muscle in the frame receives a painful jerk. When past the stream, and apparently on partially dry ground, one may jog in a foot or more, and receive a squirt of black mud up the thighs. It is only when we reach the trees and are off the sour land that you feel secure from mud and leeches. As one has to strip the lower part of the person in order to ford them, I found that often 4 were as many as we could cross in a day. Looking up these sponges, a bird's eye view would closely resemble the lichen-like vegetation of frost on window panes, or that vegetation in Canada balsam which mad philosophical instrument makers will put between the lenses of the object glasses of our telescopes. The flat, or nearly flat, tops of the subtending and transverse ridges of the central country give rise to a great many. I crossed 29, a few of the feeders of Banguiolo, in 30 miles of latitude in one direction. Burns are literally innumerable, rising on the ridges, or as I formerly termed them, mounds. They are undoubtedly the primary or ultimate sources of the Zambezi, Congo, and Nile. By their union are formed streams of from 30 to 80 or 100 yards broad, and as always deep enough to require either canoes or bridges. These I propose to call the secondary sources, and as in the case of the Nile, they are drawn off by 3 lines of drainage. They become the headwaters, the Caput Nili, of the river of Egypt. Thanks to that all-embracing providence which has watched over and enabled me to discover what I have done. There is still much to do, and if health and protection be granted, I shall make a complete thing of it. Then he adds in a note a little further on. But few of the sponges on the watershed ever dry. Elsewhere many do. The cracks in their surface are from 15 to 18 inches deep, with lips from 2 to 3 inches apart. Crabs and other animals, in clearing out their runs, reveal what I verified by actually digging wells at Kazinga and in Kabire, and also observed in the ditches 15 feet deep dug by the natives round many of their stockades, that the sponge rests on a stratum of fine white-washed sand. These cracks afford a good idea of the effect of the rains. The partial thunder showers of October, November, December, and even January produce no effect on them. It is only when the sun begins to return from his greatest southern declination that the cracks close their large lips. The whole sponge is borne up and covers an enormous mass of water, oozing forth in March and April, forming the inundations. These floods in the Congo, Zambezi, and Nile require different times to reach the sea. The bulk of the Zambezi is further augmented by the greater rains, finding many pools in the beds of its feeders filled in February, as soon as the sun comes north. Mem. In apparent contradiction of the foregoing, so far as touches the sources of the Zambezi, Said bin Abib informed me a few days ago that he visited the sources of the Liambai and of the Lufira. Each comes out of a fountain. The Lufira one is called Changozi and is small and in a wood of large trees southwest of Katanga. The fountain of the Liambai is so large that one cannot call to a person on the other side, and he appears also very small there. The two fountains are just 5 hours distant from each other. He is well acquainted with the Liambai, where I first met him. Lunga, another river, comes out of nearly the same spot which goes into the Luangwe, Kaufe. Lufira is less along the Kalangosi up there, that is less than 80 or 200 yards, and it has deep waterfalls in it. The Kone Range comes down north nearly to Mapetos. Makana is the chief of the stone houses in the Baloba, and he may be reached by 3 days of hard traveling from Mapetos. Lufira is then 1 long day west. As Moabo refuses to show me his Mita, Miangelo, or Mapanakana, as they are called, I must try and get to those of the Baloba of Makana. Senegal swallows pair in the beginning of December. Note: inundation. The inundation I have explained in the note on the climate as owing to the sponges being supersaturated in the greater rains, when the sun returns from his greatest southern declination. The pores are then all enlarged, and the water of inundation flows in great volume even after the rains have entirely ceased. Something is probably to be learned from the rainfall at or beyond the equator, as the sun pursues his way north beyond my beat, but the process I have named accounts undoubtedly for the inundations of the Congo and Zambezi. The most acute of the ancients ascribed the inundation with Strabo to the summer rains in the south, others to snows melting on the mountains of the moon, others to the northern wind, the Etesian breezes blowing directly against the mouth of the river and its current. Others, with less reason, ascribed the inundation to its having its source in the ocean. Herodotus and Pliny to the evaporation following the course of the sun. 1st September 1868. 2 men come from Kasembe. I am reported killed. The Meningo trees distills water, which falls in large drops. The Luapula seen when the smoke clears off. 50 of Said bin Omar's people died of smallpox in Usafa. Mem. Vaccine virus. We leave on the 25th, east bank of Moisi River, and cross the Luango on the 28th, the Lafubu on 1st October, and the Kalangosi on the 7th. Dr. Livingstone seems to have been unable to find opportunity to make daily entries at this period. All was turmoil and panic, and his life appears to have been in imminent danger. Briefly, we see that on his way back from the lake, he found that his Arab associates of the last few months had taken up Kasembe's cause against the devastating hordes of Mazitu, who had swept down on these parts and had repulsed them. But now a fresh complication arose. Kasembe and Chikumbi became alarmed lest the Arabs, feeling their own power, should turn upon them and possess the whole country. So they joined forces and stormed Kombo Kombo, one of the leading Arabs, and with what success we shall see. It is a fair specimen of the unaccountable complications which dog the steps of the traveler, where war is afoot, and render life a misery. He writes as follows on the 5th October. I was detained in the Imbazwa country much longer than I relished. The inroad of the Mazitu, of which Kasembe had just heard when we reached the Mafwe, was the first cause of delay. He had at once sent off men to verify the report, and requested me to remain till his messengers should return. This foray produced a state of lawlessness in the country, which was the main reason for our further detention. The Imbazwa fled before the marauders, the Bayanwezi or Garaganza, who had come in numbers to trade in copper, took on themselves the duty of expelling the invaders, and this, by means of their muskets, they did effectually. Then, building stockades, they excited the jealousy of the Imbazwa lords of the soil, who, instead of feeling grateful, hated the new power thus sprung up among them. They had suffered severely from the sharp dealing of the strangers already, and Chicumbe made a determined assault on the stockade of Combo Combo in vain. Confusion prevailed over all the country. Some Banyamweze assumed the offensive against the Bausi, who resemble the Imbazwa, but are further south, and captured and sold some prisoners. It was in this state of things that, as already mentioned, I was surrounded by a party of furious Imbazwa. A crowd stood within 15 or 20 yards with spears poised and arrows set in the bowstrings, and some took aim at me. They took us for plunderers, and some plants of ground nuts thrown about gave color to their idea. One good soul helped us away, a blessing be on him and his. Another chief man took us for Mazitu. In this state of confusion, Kazembe heard that my party had been cut off. He called Monimpanda and took the field in person, in order to punish the Banyamweze, against whom he has an old grudge for killing a near relative of his family, selling Bausi, and setting themselves up as a power in his country. 2 Arab traders now in the country felt that they must unite their forces and thereby effect a safe retreat. Chicumbe had kept 28 tusks for Said bin Omar safely, but the coming of Kazembe might have put it out of his power to deliver up his trust in safety, for an army here is often quite lawless. Each man takes to himself what he can. When united, we marched from Kazinga on 23rd September together, built fences every night to protect ourselves, and about 400 Banyamweze, who took the opportunity to get safely away. Combo Combo came away from his stockade, and also part of the way, but cut away by night across country to join the parties of his countrymen, who still loved to trade in Katanga copper. We were not molested, but came nearly north to the Kolongosi. Said parted from us and went away east to Mazamba, and thence to the coast. End of chapter 12.